Court is now for session. All the Devin Nelson judge inside.
Please be seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
We're on the record for case number 12, CF 1083A, State versus George Zimmerman. Is there anything we need to take up before we bring the jury in?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring them in.
Jurors are present, Your Honor.
Please be seated. Good morning, ladies. Welcome back. I'm going to ask you my questions. If your answer is yes to any of them, please raise your hand. During the overnight recess, did any of you have any discussions amongst yourselves or with anybody else about the case? No hands are being raised. Did any of you read or listen to any emails, text messages, tweets, social networking blogs, or social networking pages about the case? Did any of you create any of those items? Did any of you read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case? Okay, we're going to send you back to deliberate. All of the evidence, if it isn't already back there, will be back there with you in just a moment. If you have any questions or any requests, please put them in writing and hand them to the deputy. Thank you very much. You are excused. Please be seated. Is there anything we need to take up before we recess for either a question or a verdict?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you very much. Court will be in recess. Please be seated. We're on the record, case number 12, CF 1083A. We have a jury question. Question reads as follows. May we please have clarification on the instructions regarding manslaughter? Does counsel want to come up here and view it and propose a response? Court will be in recess for 30 minutes. Sarah. Please be seated. Back on the record. Who are these from, Sarah? All of them? Okay. Okay.
Your Honor, having discussed the matter with Mr. O'Mara, I believe we have almost an agreement as to our suggestion for the next point in the process.
Okay, let me hear the almost agreement.
I've provided the court with 4 cases, I believe, and there's also reference to Rule of Criminal Procedure 3.410. Essentially, as I understand the case law, the rule was modified, and it is now discretionary with the court to ask the jury for further clarification of their inquiry pretty much on that level of request. There is a more recent case, Hazuri, H-A-Z-U-R-I versus State, where the request was for a generalized readback. The Supreme Court of Florida held that the court should have asked which portions of the testimony the jury wanted read back. McGirth, I think, M-C-G-I-R-T-H versus State, which is a 48 Southern 3rd 2010 case, I believe is probably the most descriptive. That's a Florida Supreme Court case as well, and there's a section in that discusses the trial court in that case. The jury asked whether it could have a discussion with the court regarding the jury instruction on principles, and the court responded that it could not engage in a general discussion with the jury, but would be willing to address any specific question the jury might have. And I think that obviously it's within the court's discretion to do that, but I think that should be, at least at this point, the extent of any communication would simply be, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a more specific question, there's a possibility we can answer it, or something like that.
It sounds like an agreement. I think that a couple of cases, and I don't know that you have all of these.
Well, if you have some kind of an agreement, can you tell me what kind
Sure.
of response? I left the jury question in my chambers, but I can write out a response on a separate
Certainly.
sheet of paper. It's not a problem.
It seems like those cases, including Haygood, the very recent Florida Supreme Court case about 3 months ago, Haygood versus State, 109 Southern 3rd, 735. And Diaz, D-A-I-Z, it might have been cited by the State, 957 Southern 2nd, 104. Diaz is significant to the extent that it references Perryman, P-E-R-R-I-M-A-N, Florida Supreme Court case out of 1999, 731 Southern 2nd, 1243, that says that where there are questions of law, the court can ask for can get clarification on their confusion, and then can actually answer specific questions of law with a sort of straightforward, quick answer. So I think the step is, let's find out their clarification.
Okay, well, if you'll give me the wording of what you can agree on, of what to send back to the jury, I'll go ahead and send that to them, and then we'll wait to see how they respond. So
I'll suggest one.
Could either that, or we could just work. If you give us 5 minutes, we could probably come up with a written one ourselves.
Do you have a sheet of paper?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. If you can agree to one, that's great, and if not, I'll try to help you word it.
Great. I was going to approach you. Did you get the state's cases?
I do have the state's
Okay.
cases. I do have Perryman. I do have Diaz. I do have. I don't have the one that's from 3 months ago. Hager. Okay. While you're working on the wording, I will review the case.
May I just see the question for a moment?
You could. I have to go back and get it.
We're close enough. Thank you.
Okay.
And once again, I said a word and a phrase.
Reporter, read it back because I read it. You could come up here and June when
I
I read it.
remember it to be something like, can we get a clarification on the instruction of manslaughter?
Law of
Law
manslaughter.
of manslaughter.
You could get it specifically if you'll ask, if you'll come up here and read what was read into the record if you would like.
Thank you, Your Honor.
On the law.
Maybe we will, just to get the word, whether or not they asked for instruction or law.
June, it would be when I came back in here and I read the question, and we'll stop talking while you go back and look for it.
May we please have clarification on the instructions regarding that?
Clarification regarding the manslaughter instructions. Okay. Clarification. You just read everything, right?
Yes.
reapproach? You may. So, Mr. Zimmerman, the proposed answer to you heard the jury's question, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the proposed answer that has been agreed upon by both your counsel and the state is as follows. The court cannot engage in general discussions, but may be able to address a specific question regarding clarification of the instructions regarding manslaughter. If you have a specific question, please submit it. Is that acceptable to you, sir?
Yes, sir.
Acceptable to the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
Acceptable to counsel for the defense?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'll rewrite it so it's one handwriting instead of two, and we'll have you review it. You may be seated.
At that point, do you intend then to bring them into the courtroom or present it by written note?
I was just going to give it in writing to them so they can,
Acceptable to us, Your Honor, to do it that way.
right. That way they can reread it over and over again instead of me just reading it once and just to make sure that I wrote it down correctly, the court cannot engage in the general discussions, but may be able to address a specific question regarding clarification of the instructions regarding manslaughter. If you have a specific question, please submit.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this will be given by the deputies to the jurors. Just so you know, they have ordered dinner. If counsel wants to have an hour to go to dinner, you may do so.
Your Honor, if we may want to be on standby for 5 or 10 minutes because they may come right back with a question.
Okay, that's a good idea. We'll go ahead and do that. Let's be on standby for about 15 minutes in case they have a response to that. Court is in recess. Please be seated. We're back on the record. I understand that we have a verdict. Are we ready for the jury to come in?
We are, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring them in. And I will remind everybody in the courtroom that there's to be no outbursts upon the reading of the verdict or afterwards. Please be seated. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? If you'll please fold the verdict form and hand it to Deputy Jarvis. Thank you. Okay, if you'll please publish the verdict.
In the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit in and for Seminole County, Florida, State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Verdict: we, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty. So say we all four-person.
Does either side want to poll the jury?
We would, Your Honor.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. As your juror number is being called, please answer whether this is your verdict.
Juror B 29, is this your verdict? Yes. Juror B 76, is this your verdict? Yes. Juror B 37, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror B 51, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror E 6, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror E 40, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ladies, I wish to thank you for your time and consideration of this case. I also wish to advise you of some very special privileges enjoyed by jurors. No juror could ever be required to talk about the discussions that occurred in the jury room except by court order. For many centuries, our society has relied upon juries for consideration of difficult cases. We have recognized for hundreds of years that a jury's deliberations, discussions, and votes should remain their private affair as long as they wish it. Therefore, the law gives you a unique privilege not to speak about the jury's work. Although you are at liberty to speak with anyone about your deliberations, you are also at liberty to refuse to speak to anyone. A request to discuss either your verdict or your deliberations may come from those who are simply curious, from those who might seek to find fault with you, from the media, from the attorneys, or elsewhere. It will be up to you to decide whether to preserve your privacy as a juror. Is there anything we need to take up before the jury before they're sent back to the jury room to be discharged?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Ladies, thank you very much. You will be taken back to the jury room to be discharged. Seated. Mr. Zimmerman, I have signed the judgment that confirms the jury's verdict. Your bond will be released. Your GPS monitor will be cut off when you exit the courtroom over here, and you have no further business with the court.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else this court needs to take up before we recess for this case?
No, Your Honor.
Adjourn for this
Thank you for your
case.
time, Judge.
Thank you all very much. Court is, the evidence will be released. The evidence will be released.
After some 16 hours or so of deliberations, 13 hours today, the 6-woman jury has found George Zimmerman not guilty of second-degree murder or of manslaughter. The judge, as you just heard, has dismissed George Zimmerman. He is now a free man, free to go. The state did not prove its case, according to these 6 women. They did not prove that George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin with malice, with spite, with ill will. Didn't even commit manslaughter, that he unlawfully killed Trayvon Martin without malice. He was cleared of all charges and is not guilty.
And as you just heard, the jury came back in. The courtroom was totally silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then the verdict was read, and George Zimmerman shook the hands with his team, his defense team. Each juror was polled, and as you can see there, we've been watching on this double screen here some of the shots outside. So let's see what is happening outside now in this trial that has opened up really national debates on race, racial profiling, equal justice, self-defense, gun control. Let's see what's happening outside. Our Caitlin Ross is outside, and our Heather Crawford is there as well. Let's start with Caitlin and see what the crowd is doing right now. Caitlin?
No justice! Yes, I'm here right now. They are chanting no justice, no peace. A lot of people screaming loudly. They're holding up the Trayvon signs. There's a smaller group of people. Some of them appear to be in tears right now. A lot of them saying it's not fair. There was a very small period of time where somebody thought there was a guilty verdict and people were celebrating now. Now they know it is not guilty. They are all yelling no justice, no peace. A lot of them holding up signs. Now, the Seminole County Courthouse did say they would be required to leave this area as soon as the verdict was delivered, but right now there is no move.
We've heard earlier.
So you can hear what's going on right now. You can hear them yelling, the system has failed. They're yelling, the system has failed right now. A lot of people crying outside, a lot of people hugging each other. Backing up a little bit right now because people are being pushed back a little bit. There is no violence. I want to stress that right now, though. There's absolutely no violence going on right now. There is a lot of unrest, a lot of people yelling, but no one is pushing, no one's shoving. Everyone's being very respectful of each other. Now, there is a small step up right in front of the courthouse, and that's where people are standing. That's where they're holding their signs. Right now, it does look like they are being asked to back up and to start moving out, but no one is doing that right now. I'm going to see if I can walk over and find someone to talk to about what's going on here. So here you go. This is what people are thinking as the verdict comes down.
Because he knew what he was doing. He knew. I'm like, out. I'm like disappointed. I mean, I understand what this family is going through. I understand this all day.
Was there justice today?
No, it wasn't justice. No, it was not justice. Because George Zimmerman is going home free. Trayvon is 6 feet under. I mean, let's be for real.
What do you think happens now?
He gonna have to get some protection. George know he need protection. He know this. He know this. He's not gonna come home and have a real life. George is wrong for what the heck he did. He know it. He should confess what he did wrong. I just believe it's racist. No matter what you put it, however you put it, it's just stupidity tonight.
And this woman is shaking. She's explaining to me how she feels. She's actually physically shaking and in tears as she's telling me what she thinks about this verdict. I'm going to keep making my way around here because there are a lot of people that are talking, that are expressing their emotions. This woman is crying right now as I'm walking up to her.
That's not right. If he leaves this earth, I only have one hope, is that he believes in Jesus Christ. That's it. She has no more son.
Thank you so much for your...
Ma'am, obviously a very emotional verdict for you right now. What is it that's getting you?
I have a son. That's all I can say is I have a son. He's all I have. He's all I have. They deliberated for hours. They even ate on it. They slept on it.
What were you expecting to happen here?
I was expecting justice to be served, I guess. But I didn't get that.
What do you think happens from here?
I just have to pray. Because this is This is very, very emotional. There is a lot of people out here, as you can see right now. There's many people out here, all different nationalities. It doesn't strictly come down to the fact that I'm an African American. It comes down to every single race is out here. We just wanted an answer, a justified answer.
Do you think justice was served tonight?
In my opinion, I don't feel that it was.
What do you think could have been done differently? Because 6 women in there found him guilty.
I feel that they went off of what George Zimmerman's attorneys had that last 3 hours. If I had that last 3 hours to think on what he gave them to think about in deliberation, that probably would have been my verdict. But I feel that there's more to it than a one-sided story. Trayvon will never be here to tell you what happened.
Thank you for your time, ma'am. And she's one of the very emotional people outside. There are still a number of people that are power. I'm going to bring you over to the people who are still yelling right now about the verdict and what they think. We're going to talk about what this woman is saying right now.
System guilty. Revolution, nothing less. The whole system's guilty.
All
the
about
whole
money.
system's guilty.
Money.
Revolution, nothing less. The whole
American
system's
God,
guilty.
money.
So that woman, the system is guilty. We'll make our way over to other people. You can hear more people saying other things. A lot of people chanting, still holding signs as we make our way through this crowd. There's a lot going on right now. Heather, we're going to bring it back to you for just a minute as we step out here.
The whole system's guilty. 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 The whole
Heather, over to you.
The whole system's guilty. The whole system's guilty. The whole system's guilty. The whole system's guilty.
And he said that is the one thing that they want. Through all of this, regardless of the verdict, they ask that people react peacefully. And that is what they're asking. I'm out alongside the road in front of the courthouse, and I can tell you we've seen traffic really pick up along here, and we've seen a lot of people roll down their windows and shout justice or justice wasn't served, whatever it may be, driving by. This entire town obviously captivated by this case, the entire nation. For the past 2 days, folks have been gathering over the Goldsboro Community Center in Sanford to await this verdict. First Coast News' Michelle Casada continues our team coverage live tonight from there with their reaction. Michelle?
It'll be quick.
Well, Heather, emotions are running high over here. People have gathered around Trayvon Martin's memorial at the Goldsboro Community Center, and the moment the verdict came out, tears started running down people's faces. They started singing out here. Candles were placed out here earlier in the night, and everyone was out here praying for a verdict that they wanted. Of course, they did want a guilty verdict out here. They are Trayvon Martin supporters, and just right now, emotions again running high. Several people have gathered around. Some people just walked out of the living room of the community center and couldn't even stand to watch the coverage anymore. Just came out here and started singing and just leaning on each other for support. We'll be talking to several people out here who say they are disappointed, but of course they don't think justice has been served, and they just are very sad right now. We are live from the Goldsboro Community Center in Sanford. Michelle Casada, First Coast News, NBC 12, ABC 25.
Michelle, thank you very much. And just to recap, George Zimmerman found not guilty by the all-female 6-member jury who began day 2 of deliberations 14 hours ago at 9 o'clock this morning. They worked tirelessly throughout the day, eating lunch here on site, taking a 1-hour dinner break. The only insight they gave us today as to where they were leaning was a question about instructions on the manslaughter charge. Ultimately, they decided that George Zimmerman was not guilty. And after months of house arrest, George Zimmerman tonight, a free man. Shannon, Jeannie, back to you.
All right,
Heather,
thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Heather. If you could, and we're going to get back to Caitlin Ross, who, as you saw, was right in the throes of that the very boisterous crowd right now. But Heather, where are you exactly? I know it's quite a bit quieter. Where are you, and where are people gathering there around the courthouse right now?
So on the front steps of the courthouse and the front lawn, that is where Caitlin Ross is, and that is just right behind me. There's a pond right here. It's over on the other side of the pond. That is where all day long we've seen tons of people gathering with their signs, chanting on both sides of this case. I am standing closer to the road, and what I see from my vantage point is lots of police cars. There's a heavy police presence here. We notice a large uptick in police presence, both from uniformed officers and plainclothes officers here today. They've been all around the media tent. They've been all around the front of the courthouse, making sure that everything would stay peaceful tonight. In the air above me, it is surrounded by helicopters, presumably news helicopters. You hear someone just going by, honking the horn, screaming. Other people have been driving by, rolling down the windows, saying justice wasn't served. So a very emotional night tonight in Sanford as the 6-member jury finds George Zimmerman not guilty of second-degree murder, not guilty of manslaughter. He is now a free man.
And Heather, of course, this was just announced less than 15 minutes ago, so the emotions are very raw right now. It was a little bit difficult to hear during Caitlin's live shot, but we did make out the words that George Zimmerman going home free, Trayvon Martin is 6 feet under. On the other hand, we've heard for a long time now the pleas for calm for Trayvon, raise your voice, not your hands. And so, of course, people are hoping that the folks there will follow the orders to leave after the verdict. We're looking on the left-hand side of the screen now, and we can see maybe people are beginning to file out, but so far, Caitlin's been reporting to us that she's seen no violence, but a lot of emotion, some shouting, and some fairly harsh words for Zimmerman. Let's give Caitlin's shot one more try if we can. I know, folks, it's a little bit difficult to hear, but we can at least capture and understand some of the emotions going on right now. Caitlin?
Jeannie, I do want to stress there is absolutely no violence going on out here. One group that you can see right behind us is chanting nationwide protest, and the system has failed. But so far, there has been absolutely no violence. Everyone has been very calm. People obviously very emotional, very upset in the wake of the not guilty verdict, who were out here all day, but not one of them has gotten violent. Let's see if the shot will hold up. We'll walk into this a little bit and see if we can talk to some of the people who are protesting out here and talking about how they feel.
Justice! What do we want it now? What do we want? Justice! What do we want it now?
You can hear they're yelling, what do we want? Justice. When do we want it now? Over here, there is another person who's talking, speaking out about the verdict. Excuse me. Now, you're leading one of these chants, ma'am. Can you talk to me about how you feel right now?
Definitely. I mean, this is the perfect example of how the system has failed and how it continuously fails. It does not represent the people. You know, we're here to demand that there be justice, and actually we're calling on the nation, as you can hear, to have a nationwide protest to demand justice, because we did not see that today. We continuously don't see that.
Now, were you one of the people who was out here watching this verdict the entire time? What did you think was going to happen?
I mean, hey, when you grow up the way you do, I'm Mexican. My parents were undocumented, and, you know, we saw very early on.
We also promised that we would seek the truth for Trayvon Martin and due process for George Zimmerman, that we would get all of the facts and details of this very difficult case before a jury, and that we chose to do it that way because we felt that everyone had a right to know everything about this case. That for a case like this to come out in bits and pieces served no good to no one. As Mr. Guy told the jury yesterday, to the living we owe respect, to the dead we owe the truth. We have been respectful to the living. We have done our best to assure due process to all involved, and we believe that we brought out the truth on behalf of Trayvon Martin. There are so many people to thank, starting with Sheriff Esslinger and his entire sheriff's office. They've been so good to us, as has Michelle Kennedy and all of the people here. As you know, we traveled from our own circuit to be here, and that has not been easy, but it's been made so much the better by having so many people be gracious. You have respected our privacy, you the media, because we said after the press conference that we were going to try this case in the courtroom, not in the media. And we appreciate you respecting our privacy in doing that. I have an amazing team of lawyers, paralegals, and investigators who put their lives on hold and with me accepted the governor's assignment to take on this difficult investigation and this difficult case. And I'm so proud to stand here with them and to be part of the historical aspect of this case to show that the American justice system can and should only be done in a court of law. I don't believe it helps anyone for us to be out espousing opinions about our cases, and I think, as you see, we put this case in front of a jury, and that leads me to thanking the jury for the 16 hours of deliberation that they took to go over all of the facts and circumstances. What we always believed was that this was a case of details that had to be analyzed very, very carefully. I never could quite understand people, even people with law degrees, who had not read all of the police reports, who had not read all of the witness statements, yet who came up with opinions one way or the other. And this team of people standing with me, who stand with me every day in the Fourth Circuit and try tough cases like this all the time, knew that we had to do the best to get the entire facts and details of this case out and before a jury. I think this jury worked very hard. We honor them for their service. Judge Nelson worked very hard. We want her to know that we appreciate all that she did to keep this case on course. And of course, our hearts, as always, go out to our victims' family and to all victims of crime. But as long as they know that there will always be prosecutors fighting for the truth, I think that victims will continue to rely on this justice system. I'll turn it over. Bernie, would you like to say a few words?
I want to thank you all for respecting our privacy. I am disappointed, as we are with the verdict, but we accept it. We live in a great country that has a great criminal justice system. It is not perfect, but it's the best in the world, and we respect the jury's verdict.
John?
I'd also like to thank you for your time and attention that you've given this case. Both sides are deserving of your attention. We have, from the beginning, just prayed for the truth to come out and for peace to be the result, and that continues to be our prayers, and we believed they have been answered.
Rich?
I'd just like to say to the family of the dead teenager Trayvon Martin that I appreciate the way they have handled this matter. They've been dignified, they've showed class, they have kept their pain in check when they needed to, and they have grieved when they needed to. And I think that they have handled it like ladies and gentlemen. It can't have been easy, and it won't be easy, so I ask that, I know y'all have a job to do, but when you approach all that, keep them in mind too. Thank you.
I also want to thank the thousands of people who sent prayers our way, held us in their thoughts throughout this entire process. We got a lot of encouragement from a lot of people. But again, this is something that we do in our circuit. We try a lot of murder cases. We never know what a jury is going to do. We go into every case putting our best case forward and leaving it in their hands, and that's what we did in this case. Is it appropriate to take questions?
Why did you overcharge?
Well, we charge what we believe we can prove based on our Florida standard jury instructions and based on the facts of the case. So that's why we charged second-degree murder. We truly believe that the mindset of George Zimmerman and the words that he used and the reason that he was out doing what he was doing fit the bill for second-degree murder. Second-degree murder is a general intent crime, unlike first-degree murder, which requires specific intent and sort of a design on the... I'm sorry, I wasn't finished with my answer. I didn't finish my answer. And so because it's a general intent crime, you look at the way the crime is committed. It doesn't have to be between two people who know each other.
Ms. Corey, what was the greatest challenge you feel like that your team faced in winning a verdict that would have been yours?
Well, I think that one of the greatest challenges we faced is taking over a case that had already been being investigated for as long as it was before we stepped in and were able to start conducting our own investigation. It was a challenge, but it's one we took when the governor assigned this case to us, and we did everything we possibly could. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you just let me know, and I'll answer whatever you say. Thank you. Yes,
Jackie
ma'am.
Goddard for the Times of London and the Daily Beast. I just wondered if you're able to pinpoint one aspect of the case or one item of evidence or witness evidence that let you down on this.
Oh, well, we never would say that anything let us down. We are used to the imperfection of both witnesses and evidence in criminal cases. And we've all been trying criminal cases for a very long time. And you just can't guess before you take a case to a jury how something's going to turn out. So you work very hard, you put your witnesses on the stand, you argue your case to the jury, and then you focus on the law and the arguments, and then you leave it in the hands of the jury. What we promised to do was to get this case in front of a jury and give George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin each a day in court. Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't know that was you. Lisa Lampkin, NBC News.
Yes,
Can you tell me if you and the prosecution team have had a chance to speak with face-to-face Trayvon Martin's parents?
Well, I spoke with Sabrina earlier today. Do you mean since the verdict?
Yes, ma'am.
No, we have not. We actually came straight down here after the verdict.
Dana Shaban, WFTV. I was
Yes,
wondering, do you think that the judge got it wrong with the felony murder based on child abuse, or were you just disappointed with that ruling?
Oh, thank you for asking about the lesser includeds. Schedule 2 lesser includeds are part of the standard jury instructions. Once you've tried your case, then you are to look at, obviously, second-degree murder. Manslaughter is a necessarily lesser included. It's a Schedule 1. And then if we believe the facts of our case fit any of the Schedule 2 lesser includeds, then we ask for them. A charge conference is usually a very basic part of a trial and doesn't require a lot of drama, quite frankly. So because Trayvon Martin was 17 at the time he was killed, we believe, because we believe it was an intentional killing, that the facts fit the third-degree felony murder. Third-degree felony murder is a non-enumerated felony. It's a complicated concept, but it is a Schedule 2 lesser included, which is why we requested it. We request our lesser includeds. The judge gives what she believes is appropriate, and that's how we try cases.
Ma'am, David
I'm sorry.
David Ovalle from the Miami
David.
Herald. Can you talk about Florida Stand Your Ground law and whether the changes in the law in 2005 affected the facts in this case, and whether this case could have been won perhaps pre the changes in the law?
Well, justifiable use of deadly force has changed to a certain extent. Stand your ground is a procedural mechanism, as we call it, where we fully expected, because of what we were hearing, that the defense would request a stand your ground hearing, and we would have put on the same evidence. It would have been in front of just a judge instead of a jury. Well, the duty to retreat aspect actually had sort of disappeared before stand your ground kicked in. Or you're talking about the Castle Doctrine, basically, and then how that got extended into public areas. Yes, it's a very complicated and difficult area of the law. I think I did allude to that pretty specifically when we first announced the charges. Justifiable use of deadly force is one of the most difficult areas of the law and one of the most difficult affirmative defenses to which we respond in our criminal cases. Yes.
Christy O'Connor, in the beginning of this case, as you know, the country felt that there was such a strong likelihood that you would prove that that voice was Trayvon's, and then obviously things turned around. Talk about that voice tape, and also any other evidence that you thought was strong and what happened to it and how it affected you.
What was convincing to us when we listened to the tape is that the scream stops the moment the shot is fired. That's the kind of common sense evidence that prosecutors rely on every day. That scream stops when the shot is fired. And so we always believed, after hearing that tape, that it was Trayvon Martin.
Michael Anos with HLN.
Yes, Mike.
Piggybacking off that, was that the argument, or one of the key ones you thought you had to win? Who was screaming for help? Maybe it was the severity of George Zimmerman's injuries. Did you feel you had to win those, and maybe didn't?
You know, that's another interesting point, because a lot of people said, why didn't we produce the photographs of George Zimmerman's injuries, the blood on the back of his head? Well, one of the reasons is because we didn't also produce the picture of his physician's assistant who said the cut was this big. So see, when you put together a case, you have to analyze all of it, not just what was going on right at the time of the crime. So those injuries we believe did not rise to great bodily harm. Children across this country, athletes, get injuries like that every day and go right back into the game. Or their parents kiss them after they've fallen off their bike and they go right back in. I'm not trying to minimize this, but we did not believe that what the statements were that were made by George Zimmerman comported with injuries of great bodily harm. And one of the other key pieces of evidence, as Christy asked earlier, was we don't believe that he could have been straddled and had the gun on that inside back holster and gotten it out if he was truly being beaten at the time the shot was fired. And so that's another key element in our decision to file charges. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Lisa Lucas, New York Daily News.
Hi, Lisa.
Let's talk about Rachel Gentile's testimony. Were you disappointed in the result of that testimony? Do you think that damaged the case for
Lisa,
you?
we deal with witnesses to our homicides on a regular basis who are sometimes friends of the defendant, who are sometimes friends of the victim. A lot of them may or may not be educated. A lot of them may or may not have good memories. Eyewitnesses and ear witnesses come with just a realm of issues. And so you can't say that you're disappointed in them as long as you've asked them to take the stand and tell the truth, and you believe that your witnesses have done that. So, yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize for messing up the protocol. I apologize. Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Corey, I'm Barbara Liston from
Yes.
Reuters. You said earlier that one of the greatest challenges of this case was taking over an investigation that had been handled by another agency for so long.
Yes.
Are you saying that the Sanford Police Department messed up this case? Might
Absolutely
it have been
not.
different if you had handled it from the beginning?
Absolutely not. What I'm talking about is the burden that it put on us to come in after the fact. The way we work shootings in our jurisdiction is we work side by side with the police from the time of the shooting. That's not a criticism of anybody. It just made it more difficult for us than what we're used to. No, I think during the press conference, I told you all that we believe the Sanford Police did everything that they could that night. Let me remind people again that when a citizen does a shooting, and it's not in the commission of a felony, a full-blown felony, like they're being robbed, they're being raped. It's sort of an encounter that happens like this in a mutual territory. Those are a lot more difficult, and we have to look at those very carefully. Justifiable use of deadly force is a defense that we look at when police officers have to take a life or have to apply deadly force, when citizens have to do it, and when it happens inside their dwelling or inside the store that they own, or during the commission of a forcible felony. That is so much easier of a decision to make. When two people are on mutual ground, and make no mistake about it, Trayvon had every bit as much the right to be on the premises that they were on as did George Zimmerman. That goes to all the facts and circumstances behind the case. And that's why this case was unique in that sense, and that's why it was difficult.
Kathy Bellich with Channel 9 in
Hey,
Orlando.
Kathy.
Once you determined that you could not, once you found out that you could not determine who started that confrontation, why did you decide to go forward? Because isn't that a key point of a case like this?
I'll let Bernie answer that.
I think we have to go back to the beginning. Who was following who?
I'm sorry, Bernie.
Who was following who? I mean, isn't that what this case boils down to? That was our theory. Now, we respect the jury's verdict, but really what it boiled down to is a kid minding his own business being followed by a stranger. And so I would submit that that's when it started. I don't know if that answered your question or not. Well, that's not the theory, that's the facts. Jury obviously disagreed at some point, and you'll be able to hopefully inquire of them of what they thought. But when it boils down to is you got a 17-year-old kid who is minding his own business, wearing a hoodie, and gets accosted, gets followed by an individual who wants to be a cop.
I do want to mention one more thing. This case has never been about race, nor has it ever been about the right to bear arms, not in the sense of proving this as a criminal case. But Trayvon Martin was profiled. There is no doubt that he was profiled to be a criminal. And if race was one of the aspects in George Zimmerman's mind, then we believe that we put out the proof necessary to show that Zimmerman did profile Trayvon Martin. But the right to bear arms is a right in which we all believe. I especially believe in that right. What we want is responsible use when someone feels they have to use a gun to take a life. They have to be responsible in their use. And we believe that this case all along was about boundaries and that George Zimmerman exceeded those boundaries. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Ms.
Yes.
Deliberation, just a quick question for you. You mentioned that you're disappointed in today's verdict. Can you talk a little bit? You guys put a lot of effort, a lot of time, grueling schedule, 17 months. Can you talk a little bit about that frustration that you might?
Well, let me make sure I say it clearly. I respect the jury's verdict. This is no criticism of the jury verdict. I believe wholeheartedly that we live in the greatest country in the world, so I accept it. But I am disappointed. I've been trying a lot of cases. I've tried 300-something cases, about 80-something murder cases. This is only my second murder case that I've lost. Am I disappointed? Yes, because I thought he was guilty. But what matters is what the jury said, and I accept it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Mr. Deliberation,
Yes, sir.
could I get your impression of the 2005 expansion of the Florida's self-defense statutes? Does this make your job harder?
You know, self-defense has existed for a long time. Right. And we've dealt with it in Jacksonville for a long time. We've tried a lot of self-defense cases. I personally have tried, 10, 15 self-defense cases. They're tough cases, but we accept them. So the law really hasn't changed that much. Stand your ground was a big thing, but really the law hasn't changed. And we believe in the right to bear arms and the right to self-defense. We felt in this case that it was not appropriate.
Hi, I'm Michelle Sunder with USA Today. John Guy talked about the fact that this was going to be a verdict that sent a message, and that it was going to be about what happens when a guy follows a young child and then shoots him. Could you tell me what you think about what this verdict means to the nation and what it says?
Yeah, I don't believe I ever said it was going to send a message. I mean, criminal cases are about defendants and victims. It's most instances like this one, a one-on-one confrontation. So it was a determination about what happened between those two individuals. I certainly didn't mean to characterize this as sending a message outside the courtroom.
One more question. Prosecutor Corey, this question is about Ben Kreidboss. Since testifying in that pretrial hearing about discovery evidence, we understand that he was terminated. Can you talk to us about why he was terminated from your office?
I believe that we have released a letter that details why he was terminated. And again, we want to keep the focus on what we promised 15 months ago, which was to get all of the facts of this case in front of a jury or in front of a judge if it had been a stand your ground hearing. And I believe that's what we've done. I believe the focus needs to be on how the system worked and how now everyone in this country, because of you all covering this case, can say that they know the facts that were allowed in front of the jury, and now they know and can make up their own minds about the guilt of George Zimmerman, and know that this jury gave it a lot of time and attention. I don't think anybody will tell you that they don't appreciate how much the jury did. One more thing that I did forget to mention earlier is when you asked about second-degree murder, remember that the definition of that is an act or a series of acts. And we believe that the series of acts of Mr. Zimmerman and what he did leading to Trayvon Martin's death were why we were able to file second-degree murder. And I'm sorry, Jackie, was that the last question? Again, we want to thank all of you. We want to thank all of the people who have sent prayers our way. We want to thank, again, the people of Seminole County for allowing us to come in here and try this case. God bless you, and we do ask for peace and for privacy to the extent that Trayvon Martin's family wants that privacy. Thank you very much.
Good evening, guys. How are you? I fear that I'm leaning towards the end of the time that you guys will just listen to everything that I have to say. So I just want, there's a letter that I wrote to Sheriff Esslinger, and I just think it needs to be spoken. It's not, it was meant as a letter to him personally, but he was okay with me reading it to you. So Don and I just want to take a minute just to acknowledge not only the court system and, of course, what Judge Nelson did in making sure that this trial got moved forward and got to a good conclusion, but I don't think that anybody here realizes what effort was put into by the Sheriff's Office and Sanford Police Department to make sure that everything that we had to do in this case was done properly and was done in a way that ensured the safety of the community. So if you would indulge me for just a minute, you'll notice in my arguments, if not in my letters as well, I can get a bit verbose. So, dear Sheriff Esslinger, I want to take a moment to express my and my team's sincere thanks and appreciation for the way that your organization has handled the George Zimmerman matter. I also want to get this letter to you before the verdict. This was July 8th, last week, because I did not want its message to be impacted one way or the other by the eventual outcome. I know that your involvement even preceded my involvement back on April 2012, and that you used the entirety of your department's resources to properly address the reality of where this case was and the potentials of where it might go on any given day. While I understand that I am unaware of most of the work that your department has done, I am very aware of at least some of the results. I also understand by virtue of the confidential nature of a lot of the efforts, you will never receive true recognition for the unseen work that ensured each positive result. I have what I perceive to be a unique perspective on the countywide impact of this case and your responses to it. The integrity and the dedication that you and the entire Sheriff's Office has brought to this difficult and complex situation has, in large part, helped direct it towards a more rational and peaceful unfolding. I'm not sure what the next couple of weeks may bring, but I am confident that you will continue to protect your county, its citizens, and its institutions, particularly the now often assailed judicial system. I also want to express my heartfelt gratitude for the way that you handled me and my team throughout the difficult times. The men and women of your department have treated all members of the process, from my team to the Martin family, to the prosecution, to the public, in a completely professional and respectful way. And we have done it in such an organized and seamless manner that their presence went almost completely unnoticed. What I have noticed is your department's calm certainty that they know what to do, how to do it, and how to protect all of those involved, including the process, while accomplishing their tasks. Personally, this made my job much easier because I can focus my team's efforts on the proper presentation of our case without concerns for outside influences or logistical concerns. We come to the courthouse every day knowing that you have that covered. I do not know what awards or commendations are available to acknowledge the pure perfection with which you and your department have handled the entire event, but I am certain that you have the vote of every member of my team, the prosecution team, the judicial staff, the media, and every citizen who has interacted with your department in this case. Thanks again. Anyway, I just thought that was appropriate because both Sheriff Esslinger and Sanford PD has done an amazing job in making this process as peaceful and successful. Having said that, we appreciate the jury's time and effort. We really do. They spent an enormous amount of time during the trial listening. They were very intent. I mentioned at one point that some jurors, you have to wake them up by shouting or dropping a file. Not this juror. They listened. They took notes. They were as engaged as everybody else in the process, and it made for the type of verdict that we had to have, which was a verdict that listened to all available facts, not all of the facts, but all the available facts, the evidence, the law, and the timed consideration that the jury gave to it before making that final decision. Obviously, we are ecstatic with the results. George Zimmerman was never guilty of anything except protecting himself in self-defense. I'm glad that the jury saw it that way, and I hope that everyone who thinks, particularly those who doubted George's reasons and doubted his background, now understand that the jury knew everything that they knew was enough for them to find him not guilty. You know even more than the jury know about both parties' past, and we know that George was the type individual, from what you know, and his involvement in his community. This was not a unique event for George to try and be involved with his community and to be involved with the police when it was necessary. I'm just glad that the jury saw it that way. Very, very happy with the results.
Sometimes I can be a little more blunt. I think the prosecution of George Zimmerman was disgraceful. I am gratified by the jury's verdict, as happy as I am for George Zimmerman. I'm thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty. For that, we are eternally grateful. But it makes me sad, too, that it took this long, under these circumstances, to finally get justice.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Hi there, Amanda Evans, News 13. I have a question for you, Mr. West. This case became a little personal for you. There were some threats made to your family, some jabs about opening statements. We all watched as things kind of got heated between you and Judge Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what this was like for you, this trial, these last few weeks, just personally?
Sure. Stop me if you've heard this one before. No, I'm not going to talk about that. No. This trial is about George Zimmerman, not about pictures of ice cream cones or... Now, I still think the joke was funny. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry I didn't tell it better, but there was an important reason for it. There needed to be a disconnect, frankly, a disconnect from an act that was hard to follow. But I knew, Mr. O'Meara knew, and you all soon found out that it was indeed just an act. I couldn't follow that act with that kind of passion and glaring and staring and all of that. We needed facts. Unlike what Ms. Corey said, they brought the facts. They didn't. Anybody that watched this trial knew the defense put on the case. We proved George Zimmerman was not guilty. So, no, I won't talk about that. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Ben Montgomery, Tampa Bay Times. Can you give us any insight into Mr. Zimmerman's state of mind upon hearing the verdict?
I don't know exactly how you can feel when you're in trauma and stress for 16 months. And he's very, very happy with the result, obviously. There's just a release that happens, an emotion release, and endorphin release, and adrenaline release. I think it's probably going to settle on him tonight when he's with his family and can actually realize that he doesn't need to come back to the courthouse tomorrow or ever again unless he wants to under his own free will. So I think he's going to be great. I think he's still worried, and hopefully everyone will respect the jury's verdict as they should, and most have said they would, and we'll take it day by day. But he's doing good.
This is Grace Wong with In Session. I know this is a yes or no question, but I want you to expand on it after I ask the question. Was this a fair fight for you?
Let me say it this way. I need to apologize to every public defender in the state. And for this reason, because I said that the way that we were treated in the discovery process and the fights that we had to go through in the discovery process made me think that maybe the prosecution thought they were dealing with a couple of young, overworked public defenders. And that insulted public defenders. Don West was one. I learned my craft from public defenders because when I was a prosecutor, that's who I learned from. So to the extent that there was some insult there, I apologize for it. What I meant to say was that it seemed as though the prosecution is used to getting away with some of what they got away with the enormous demands they put upon us to try and get discovery that in 30 years of experience, I've always gotten on the table right up front. So yes, it was a fight that we had to fight. They outfunded us. They made it extraordinarily difficult. If only we had the time back that it took us to fight for the stuff, the information, discovery, the just result that we had to fight for, this case might have been tried 6 months ago, and certainly I wouldn't have had the hundreds and hundreds of hours wasted in a situation where they never should have made us waste time. Was it fair? It was a little bit David and Goliath, but we won.
Danny Morales with the Valencia Voice here. George had a very good poker face on when the verdict came in. At what point did he express his gratitude to you and how excited he was to finally be able to go home?
I think per what we discussed with him beforehand, it was after everyone sort of left the room when you can actually show a little bit more emotions. You just, when you have an emotional outpouring like that, sometimes you get that on camera or something like that is not really what you want to see. But he certainly thanked us, obviously, and I think he was able to finally emote as it became a realization that he truly is done.
Hi, Lisa Lucas, New York Daily News. I'd like to ask you what you feel was your best moment and your weakest moment, and ask the same of you to say that for the prosecution.
I think the best moment was when they said not guilty. I think that was probably the best moment, right,
Yep,
Ben?
I agree with that.
So that's it. And during the trial, if you haven't heard of trial hypnosis, I'll explain it to you. I absolutely believe that every time I opened my mouth, it was a great moment. Nobody else thought so, but I always did. So it was the whole. It's a trial. It's where we live. It's like a surgeon being in surgery. It's where you want to be. It's what you want to do. So everything that we did was with a purpose and a plan. Most of it worked out how we wanted. Every motion we filed, every argument we made, it's just what we do as decent trial lawyers.
Lisa Lampkin, NBC News.
Hello,
Mark, I have
Lisa.
a couple legal questions. One is, speaking about the state attorney's office, now that you've gotten the not guilty verdict you wanted, are you still going to pursue the sanctions, number one? And then second of all, hopefully not upsetting your wife, because I'm sure you're going to need a vacation, but how are you going to address the civil aspect of this now, as far as the stand your ground and keeping George Zimmerman from being liable?
Sure. As to the first, yes, there's a sanctions hearings to be set. There is not only that, but of course the state is then responsible for a lot of the costs that we've incurred to acquit George Zimmerman. So we're going to have a hearing on that as well. So yeah, we're not quite done yet. And on the civil aspect, if someone believes that it's appropriate to sue George Zimmerman, then we will seek and we will get immunity in a civil hearing. And we'll see just how many civil lawsuits are spawned from this fiasco. So.
Finn Gomez with Fox News. Mr. O'Mara, Mr. West, what happens to, I know this seems like a kind of a basic follow-up, but what happens now to Mr. Zimmerman? Are we going to hear from him? What does he do now? Where does he go? Like, what's next for your client?
I don't know what you do after 16 months of this. I'm really not sure. I think you need to just go somewhere, relax, get your bearings back. I think that he would like to, once he settles in, let you know who he really is, since that couldn't be told except through us, and even in that way, quite limited. But I'm sure that if he could wave his magic wand, he would just sort of get his life back. And I know that it always brings up the idea of the life that's lost forever, and I'm not comparing the two, but now that the jury decided that he acted properly in self-defense, maybe we can give him a little bit of that understanding as well, that he now needs to get on with his life after having suffered several traumas.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
I have a two-part question, Molly Hennessy Fisk with the LA Times. The first part is the prosecution raised this question about whether the outcome would be different if the races of the defendant and the victim were different. Do you think it would have been different if George Zimmerman was black? And the other part of my question is, does he fear for his safety? Have precautions been made surrounding his security?
Well, I think that the things would have been different if George Zimmerman was black for this reason. He never would have been charged with a crime. It seems as though what happened was an event that was being looked into by Sanford Police Department, and quite honestly, as we now know, looked into quite well. I have taken advantage of police departments who have not done a good investigation of crimes, because that's what I do for a living. When I looked at the Sanford Police Department investigation, they had done quite a good job, and you can compare what they did across the country to see who does good or bad jobs with their investigation, but they were doing quite a lot. What happened was this became a focus for a civil rights event, which again is a wonderful event to have, but they decided that George Zimmerman would be the person who they were to blame and sort of use as the creation of a civil rights violation, none of which was borne out by the facts. The facts that night was not borne out that he acted in a racial way. His history is a non-racist, and you know all the anecdotes about the mentees and the children living in his home when he was young and the Sherman Ware incident. So if only those who decide to condemn Mr. Zimmerman as quickly and as viciously as they did would have taken just a little bit of time to find out who it was that they were condemning, it would never have happened. And it certainly wouldn't have happened if he was black, because those people who decided that they were going to make him the scapegoat would not have.
What about safety?
And I'm sorry?
She can ask.
She did have a two-part
That's
question.
all right. I'll ask her question because I wanted to ask that too. First of all, is he, how concerned is he? Is he going to sort of stay in hiding for a while and sort of feel it out and see what happens? And then the second question is, I've never seen jurors thank defense attorneys for giving them instructions on the law before, as what happened to you during jury selection. My jaw dropped open. What was your reaction when they thanked you for explaining the law?
As to the first question, yes, he has to be very cautious and protective of his safety, because there is still a fringe element who have said, at least in tweets and everything else, that they want revenge, that they will not listen to a verdict of not guilty, although I think everyone in this room would agree this was a very fair trial, more fair to the state maybe on occasions than to the defense, but certainly it was a fair enough trial in that the state got to present everything that they could. So in that sense, those people who have their anger, they're just going to have it because they're angry people, not because it's based in fact. Can't help that, but we do need to be worried about it. Second question, I mentioned it earlier, everything I do I think is done well. I don't remember a juror actually verbalizing thank you to me when I'm trying to help them understand an area of law that, as we talked about, is utterly unique, and we drag them in off the street and ask them to take on our mantle of how we work our lives in these courtrooms and to do it well. But maybe I'll take that as a compliment that they were listening. And obviously, they got an opportunity to put that in practice with their verdict.
It's for Don West, Michael Lanos, HLN. You had to cross-examine Rachel Gentel and Dr. Bao. Did you relish the challenge, or was it a nightmare?
No question it was a challenge. What I think we needed to establish with Ms. Gentel, while it took several hours to accomplish, and there were those challenges within that itself, we showed through her testimony when the phone call, the second to last phone call ended with Trayvon Martin. What was it? 7:12:48, something like that, 7:11:48. And when the next one started, and then when the event itself occurred. Through that testimony, corroborated by the phone records, we could show, as Mr. O'Mara clearly pointed out in closing, there were 4 minutes. There were 4 minutes in between the time when Trayvon Martin ran off until he reappeared and the confrontation with George Zimmerman occurred. As well, the circumstances under which Ms. Gentel was asked to answer questions were extraordinarily challenging for her. My goodness, she wanted to be left alone. She didn't volunteer anything until she was pulled out of this. And the first interview she gave was with the family lawyer, with the family present on the other end of the phone. It was an interview made for TV, not for law enforcement, that was then followed by an interview with the state attorney's office on April 2nd under the most extraordinary circumstances. It took place in Ms. Fulton's living room with Ms. Fulton sitting next to Ms. Gentel. That set the stage for the witness herself saying, I was uncomfortable. I changed my testimony to really to accommodate the feelings of Ms. Fulton. That was the setting for all of this. Plus, as Mr. O'Mara pointed out, she really didn't want to be there. Was that a challenge? Of course it was. But I think ultimately, when you distill it to its important parts, that we did accomplish ultimately what we wanted. As to Dr. Bao, did you hear Dr. DeMaio's testimony? Much of my cross-examination of Dr. Bao was to set the stage for that. indicating where they would clearly disagree, trying to identify why and how they would disagree, and then offering, I think, perhaps the foremost expert in the country on the very issue we had in our case.
Hi, Valerie Boy, Fox 35 News. 2 questions. Do you think the judge was fair or unfair to you? And my other question is, do you think this verdict will hurt race relations?
Judge Nelson runs her courtroom very well, and she moved this case along at a pace that I appreciated. Obviously, we were asking for motions to continue along the way, not because of her timeline as much as because of the state's concerns over discovery. So it turns out we were able to accomplish what we needed to in the time she gave us. Within the context of the courtroom herself, as I mentioned a couple of times, I appreciate that she reminds me when I do things like speaking objections or somehow no comes out of my mouth. And that's okay. She needs to run a strict courtroom. And I think that she did. So I sort of appreciate that. And I'm okay with that. We certainly had some concerns over the rulings as they occurred, but we respect them as the rulings they are. You had a second part to that?
Do you think this verdict will affect race relations?
I kept saying a year ago that I really hope that they don't. I kept suggesting to Mr. Crump on 3 separate occasions that we not suggest that this is a civil rights case of the century, because it's just not. It was a self-defense case. Did it bring to the forefront the conversation that young black males are treated a certain way in the criminal justice system? Absolutely. Is that positive? Absolutely. Do we need to have that conversation? Absolutely. However, if portending that conversation on top of the Zimmerman verdict is going to affect our ability to have that conversation, shame on them, because that conversation needs to be had. And now it may not be had because we have sort of artificially separated the 2 camps, if you will, over this verdict. This verdict still has nothing to do with civil rights. Civil rights needs to be talked about, but not in the context of the George Zimmerman verdict.
George Howell with CNN. This question specifically to you, Mr. West. As far as the relationship with the judge, the back and forth, can you talk to us just a bit about that? Do you feel that you were getting fair treatment? And a second question that's similar to both of you. What do you say regarding the tension? What do you tell people who've dug in on one side or the other?
I'd like to keep my bar license for a couple more years. And the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was, what do you tell people? This has become, people have watched around the country and have dug in on either side of this. What do you tell people, just given the tension that could follow this verdict?
That's been such a challenge for me. Obviously, while I've tried a number of cases over the last 33 years or so, a number of them with extremely high stakes, death penalty cases. Nothing, of course, like this with the media attention. Nothing that had the case tried over and over and over again in the media. Nothing where the media was accused of such irresponsibility early on, frankly, being swept along with this narrative that's simply been shown not to be true. To me, as a trial lawyer, that was an incredible distraction, because I like to, in fact, the only place I can try a case is in the courtroom, and I think we did that. So I don't know how to respond.
Yes.
Jackie Goddard for the Times of London and the Daily Beast. You mentioned about George wanting to get his life back. There's one person who's not going to. Have you got any words for Trayvon Martin's family?
They suffered a tragedy. I've acknowledged that to the family on 3 previous occasions. Nothing can bring back Trayvon Martin. Every time any life is lost, particularly a young life, it's a tragedy. We hear about it in car accidents. We hear about it with cancer. I lost a 13-year-old niece to cancer. We hear about it constantly, and it's always a tragedy. But I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I think that the evidence supported that George Zimmerman did nothing wrong, and that he was battered and beaten by a 17-year-old who, for whatever reason, and we won't know, thought that he had to lash out and attack violently. And it turned out that all of the forensic evidence supports that. None of it supports that George was ever the aggressor, certainly not legally, and I don't believe morally. So did that end up leading to the tragic loss of life? Yes. Could it have been avoided? yes. When it really came down to it, 45 seconds before the gunshot, when George was getting battered, I still believe that that decision was in Trayvon Martin's hands more than my client's. And as I mentioned, they get my greatest sympathies for their tragic loss of their son. No one should ever have to suffer losing a child, ever. But it happens much more than we're willing to acknowledge sometimes or that we want to admit. This is a tragedy like many other loss of children. It's just not one that George was responsible for.
Ty Wright, Valencia Voice. When the jury asked for clarification on the instructions regarding manslaughter, was there any nervousness between you guys and George that he would be facing the lesser charges?
My understanding was that they were confused by a confusing jury instruction. I said to the judge, Mr. West first argued one day, and before I started my closing the next day, that the manslaughter instruction is very confusing. I don't want to get into the legal part of it, and I know you don't, but if you look at it, justifiable homicide is identified within manslaughter, excusable homicide is identified within manslaughter, and somewhere separate is justifiable use of deadly force. If you try and read those, they are logically inconsistent, but not legally inconsistent. And I think that jury, as smart as they are, because they were thinking, looked at it and said, why are you telling us about excusable homicide? It's just that we had to, even though it had no application to the facts of this case. So, sure.
Hi. Hi. Yami Shalsunder with USA Today. Don West, you said that I am thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty. Can you talk about what the tragedy you're talking about? We talked about civil rights issues here, people not falsely or wrongly linking it to race. Could you just tell me a little bit more what you mean by that tragedy into a travesty?
The tragedy is the loss of Trayvon Martin's life in every respect. Regardless of what he was doing or immediately what led up to it, it's a tragic loss of life. It not only will impact, of course, Trayvon Martin's family and all those that knew him forever and ever. This event itself also impacts George Zimmerman forever and ever and ever. This is something no one gets over. There's no winners here. There's no monsters here. That's the tragedy. The travesty, it would have been a travesty of justice had George Zimmerman been convicted. That's the travesty.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the time. I think that was, someone said it was the last question, so.
Just very, please. Iris Delgado with Univision National Network. From your private conversations with George Zimmerman, what was the most compelling statement from George Zimmerman that made you believe in his innocence?
There's not just one, but if you really want to look at the statements, the first opportunity that he could say something about this case, he said, I was screaming out for help and nobody came. When Officer Serino challenged him and said, I think there may be a video of this, he said, thank God. I dismiss with disgust the state's suggestion that he was some cop wannabe savant who knew that he could take on that bluff. I think that really speaks to what George was going through that night and how he presented it. So that, if you want to look for some insight from him, that was it.
Did he ever cry to you?
I'm sorry?
Did he ever cry to you, showed you emotions?
Absolutely. 16 months of being, some people called him the most hated man in America for having defended his own life only after getting beat for 45 seconds. And then a man who believes in the system, whose dad was a judge, who maybe wanted to be a cop or a prosecutor, then gets a system. Two systems went against George Zimmerman that he can't understand. You guys, the media, he was like a patient in an operating table where mad scientists were committing experiments on him and he had no anesthesia. He didn't know why he was turned into this monster, but quite honestly, you guys had a lot to do with it. You just did, because you took a story that was fed to you and you ran with it and you ran right over him. And that was horrid to him. Then he comes into a system that he trusts. Let's not forget, 6 voluntary statements, voluntary surrender. And he believes in a system that he really wanted to be part of, right? And then he gets prosecutors that charge him with a crime they could never, ever prove. It's not like they didn't lose evidence along the way, right? So I don't think anyone would argue with me in this room that they had evidence of second-degree murder. This in-your-heart kind of stuff, that's not what we're supposed to do, and it's not what they're supposed to do. So those two systems failed them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
That's not what they're supposed to do. So those two systems failed them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Mark O'Mara taking the media to task and the system to task there at the end of the press conference. I want to mention, do some legal business here. 7 minutes after 11, you're watching WTLV TV, WJXX. First Coast News, our coverage of the George Zimmerman trial.